Yeah, so astrologically, in practice, at the moment, there is a lot going on with Mars, and Mars is making a difficult aspect to Pluto. And that's been building up all over the last week, and you can see that in terms of there's all these tensions that have been building up, which is really the dredging up of old memories, of old traumas that aren't really resolved, and those being expressed, those coming up in the outside environment. So how do I mean the outside environment? Mars being masculine, masculine being outside environment, and use of force kind of idea. Militaristic sort of a Mars thing. But in my last week, there's a lot of stuff about a battle in a bog. There's a lot of like slagging off going on in comments. There's a lot of people attacking people over like you. There's a lot of like, I was awake before you were. There's a lot of like, you're not as awake as I am. There's a lot of this falling out amongst people in the truth movement, in the nationalist movement, and I presume is going on the left as much as the right. You know, you've got these people chasing, blah, blah, there's loads of examples of it. The other thing that's going on then is like a feeling of weeping, of real sadness. So that stuff was building up until this morning, and then this morning it reached its peak, and now there's perhaps a chance of it being less extreme. But what is coming up in this week is a relationship between Venus and Saturn. So Saturn is constricting. Oh yeah, the thing about like Mars and Pluto, well, Mars is all this outer stuff and the violence and the like expressing stuff, and Pluto is like the deep stuff, the stuff that's deep wounding, and those wounds get covered up. We call it like recovering from an injury. But like that's actually just covering the injury over again. That's not actually healing an injury, that's just a recovery. Like the recovery program from addiction, it's just like stopping the addiction. It's not really necessarily dealing with like, why did I start to get addicted in the first place? It's often replacing this kind of addiction with another kind of addiction, kind of thing. Anyway, so there's also Venus and Saturn. They're also making an aspect. And the Venus is like the structure, but it can also be constriction. Basically, what's coming up for people is like feeling really sad and feeling like the masculine is suppressing the feminine, basically. So it's the mind is suppressing the feelings, and there's going to be a lot of this coming up in this week coming. And that's why it's worthwhile learning what the symbols in the language of astrology actually mean, because those symbols do exist in the physical sky, and the correlation between what's going on in the sky telling a story and that story being acted out here amongst us on collective levels, in the mundane astrology of what's going on globally, in the evolutionary story of what's been building up over thousands of years of what we call civilization, and how that civilization is coming towards this artificial intelligence, end times, Third World War, a war to end all wars, all of those kind of scripts. And it is actually described now, hey, it's like any other language. Some people are just really logical with that language. Some people are really doomed with that language. Some people are like really bypassing with that language. But in wisdom, if you learn the language of what does Saturn mean, what does Mars mean, what do the planets as actors on a stage, what do those characters represent, and recognize what that represents inside in humanity, and in your own life test that to see, well, does this stuff actually help me make sense of my own personality, kind of thing. If I learn from my own birth chart what these characteristics are for Saturn and Neptune, and there's the 9 planets and the sun and the moon, and then you've got the signs, they've got characteristics like places, and then you've got the houses, which I don't pay too much attention to really. I just don't, whether I should or not, I just haven't. But that's essentially like the expressions of, the different kind of jobs in society, and houses are to do with how the sun rises. It's like the hours in the day, but applied to the different spheres of life. But yeah, I don't bother about that stuff. It's kind of going into too much minute detail for me, and it's already detailed enough. But it's broader pictures is the sort of stuff I'm interested in. This is kind of guy. See a bit more about astrology. I wonder, should I slow down and actually say a bit more about it in ways that are less overwhelming for the listener and for people who don't really know much about astrology. your birth chart. The birth chart describes the map of where the planets were in the heavens at the moment that you were born, as accurate as you can get to what time of day or night you were born at, on what date, in what place. So it's the time and space in which you're born, and it's like a photograph of what was going on in the atmosphere. And the positions of the stars, not the stars, but the planets and the sun and the moon, in the backdrop of the stars, which is what the zodiac signs are. And the relationships, so you can have a square, and that's like a 90-degree angle of what's going on in the sky between whatever planets it might be, or the sun and Pluto might be right on top of each other in the same part of the sky at the moment that you're born. And if your sun and Pluto, for example, are exactly aligned, then that's the surface in the moment and the deepest down stuff. Yeah, your personality and your deepest past life wounds kind of thing. And it will allow that you can see to the depths of people, and it's kind of terrifying for people when you meet someone with a Sun Pluto conjunct, because especially if it's really exact, it means it's almost they can see right into your soul and know what's really going on with you. And they have this depth about themselves. Because they have that depth about themselves, they can see into other people's depths too. But that can be very unnerving, because the personality mask of where the sun was rising at the time you were born, and that's called the ascendant, that's like how it appears to people what you're like. And I could actually be mixing them up, so you have to research these things for yourself and find out what's the difference between an ascendant and a sun sign, and the position of the sun relative to the other planets and relative to the sign that it's in. And that's the most basic stuff is around the sun, which is funny enough why so many people discount astrology, because they're going like, I'm not just like my sun sign. Well, that's because there's actually all these other aspects that also make up your personality. Just because your sun is in Aquarius doesn't mean that says everything about who you are. You're not just a one-dimensional person. You've actually got like 12 dimensions at least, in the amount of planets, when you include things like Chiron, the wounded healer. So there's a language to astrology, just like letters make up words to make up sentences. The planets are essentially like the letters. And the planets and the aspects and the signs and the characteristics of all of these make up the grammar of a language with which you can describe the evolution of a human that is set in your birth chart. And then that tesseract of like what's going on internally in your world as it develops. Your birth chart stays fixed the same as it is, but relative to what continues to move in the sky, that's why you'll have transits. So I'm not going to try and explain astrology any more than that. I'm going to encourage people, look, it's never too late to actually start to figure out, find out where the Jupiter is in your chart, find out where each of the planets are in your chart. Find out what the relationships are between the planets in your chart at the moment you were born, because you're carrying those characteristics with you throughout your life. And it will help you in the same way as reading the newspaper would help you know what's going on in the world. Being able to read what's going on in the astrology will help you know what's going on in the world and what your part is in it. And, you know, like this week, if you find in this week coming that you're having floods of tears and grief and sadness and loneliness and stuff from the past just coming up, and you're like, man, why the fuck is all this coming up? I thought I'd already dealt with this a few years ago. You know, you see it coming over last week, stuff around COVID and how people dealt with COVID is actually coming up somehow now. Why would that be? Astrologically it'll make sense, but in the normal world it don't really make any sense, you know. So if you've got loads of emotions suddenly come up over stuff and you're like, man, none of this seems to be happening in my outside world at the moment. Why am I being bowled over with all these old feelings that I thought I'd already recovered from? And if you learn about astrology, you can get to understand beautifully bigger pictures and be able to not just victim blame yourself and like, I shouldn't be feeling these feelings, and let your mind go mad criticizing you for having feelings. You can be like, oh, Venus is actually going through some stuff, and the stuff Venus is going through is around those patterns that are about the suppression of the feminine by the masculine, destroying beauty in order to be, practically bulldozing to create new worlds. Anyway, there's the sun. Can you see that? Yeah, it's quite a beautiful sunset. Kind of thing. I'm gonna hang up now. Bye.